This is KPPQ LP Ventura, 104.1 FM, and we're in the Women's Room, where we appreciate and support each other. I'm your host, Kathleen Good. It's International Women's Day, and all of March is Women's History Month. We are celebrating here in the Women's Room with a poetry reading and discussion. My guest today is Marsha De La O, poet and friend of the show. Marsha has just published her fourth book of poetry titled Creature, in which, among other themes, she bears witness to women's close association with life and death. We're so happy to have you here today, Marsha.
Thank you so much. I'm very glad to be here.
Oh, I'm glad too. I wonder if you might give your listener a backstory on the time during which you wrote the poems in your new book, and also why you titled it Creature.
The backstory on writing the poems for this book is that I wrote them during the last 5 years of my father's life, during which time my siblings and I took turns going down to his home and taking care of him, staying with him there so that he could remain in his home. It's titled Creature because of the theme of the connections to the created world among all of us creatures, and also because of an incident in which a hawk made a mistake and flew into my home.
Oh, okay. Well, there'll be time for another story and another show on that, I hope. The theme of women as the ones who preside over life and death is central to the poem Gravid and Amber from the book. Perhaps now would be a good time for you to give the listener your thoughts on how women are the ones who have to deal with the messiness of birth and death.
Well, I think for centuries, birth has been, for women, has always involved other women attendants. And just recently, in the last, 200 years, have male doctors come onto the scene. As for the messiness, it is a tremendously powerful, emotional, draining, and messy experience to give birth and then immediately afterwards to caretake the newborn infant. And that has often been done by women almost exclusively. Also, there's a mythic connection here. In Greek myth, there are goddesses of birth and also goddesses of death, the Kyries, who appear to people who are about to die. Mm. And that is also true in Norse myth. And of course, we've all heard of Kali, the Hindu goddess.
Uh-huh. I just was thinking when you were talking about, that birthing has been the province of women, that it seems less so today, that a woman is almost less supported than many years ago, when many women would attend the birth and a midwife would, perform whatever, she needed to do.
Yes, perhaps so, but when we compare it to, say, the way our mothers gave birth, where they often used twilight sleep or where the partners were not allowed in, at least there's been a swing back towards human connection.
Yeah, I think you're right. You're very right. Well, with that background, I think it would be a good time to read the poem to your listener.
Okay.
And Marsha will be reading her poem, Gravid and Amber.
Gravid and Amber. When I went into labor at the wrong time, and finally the doctor cut my flesh deep enough for her to burst from my body, they held her up, and she was blue. My first thought, how beautiful a color, like Krishna, the Lord of the Sky. My next, if she is Krishna, I won't get to keep her. They whisked her away, cleared her airways, returned her. I saw life and death take each other by the hand. She was delivered into the light, and that is one fragile truth. After that, I felt as if there were a space in my body for death, and I needn't worry it. Here I am now, an older woman, and death is on my mind, showing up mostly in the slant of light, its way of falling, gravid and amber. My father feels it too, this presence coming in as light. He's humbled by loss, humiliated, his poor right hand hanging large at the end of his thinning arm. That relentless heart hard labor gave him, pounding on and on. One day I say, maybe we can get birds close enough for you to see them. I'll bring bird seed and make a warm bed outside. Would you like that? And he answers, yes, please.
Oh, thank you for reading that. I was interested when you write that after the birth, you felt as if there was space in your body for death, but that you needn't worry it. Now, how has everything changed for you after that experience? What do you now know?
I felt the experience of giving birth was one of the most profound things that has ever happened to me. And it truly connected me to the cycle of life. And that I was able to grow this being within me, and then with help bring her safely into life. And it was with some danger. There is danger. That's why they call it a delivery. You are delivered. The child is delivered.
Mm-hmm.
And it just connected me to the entire cycle, to the beginning and the end.
Uh-huh. Very profound. So a theme of the poem is the light in new birth and the dark of decline. If we could now address the title, Gravid and Amber, and the same words in the line, death is on my mind again, showing up mostly in the slant of light, its way of falling, gravid and amber. Talk a bit about how you use light to describe the new life and also declining life.
Well, the thing that comes to mind for me is the Spanish expression for giving birth, which is dar la luz, to bring to the light, to give to the light. And that causes me to imagine the fetus contained within this world, which is mostly dark, and then brought into the fullness of life. As to death and those declining years with my father, there was something memorial about it. And there was, because it was precious time, and it was slow time, and there was something about the light coming into the room that seemed thicker or more viscous. And that's why death seemed to become a presence via the light at that time.
I imagine when you said that the light was sort of like a late afternoon light, that's kind of heavy and sort of orangey looking.
Yes.
Yeah.
More amber
than
just brilliant white light.
Yeah. So a woman's issue here is one of labor, to push out the baby, and then the endless toil to meet the needs of the baby, and then the mess and toil of caring for the needs of the aged and dying. Now, you wrote the poems for the book during the time you were caring, along with your siblings, for your dying father. How did taking care of your father and the long wait until death help you form the thesis that women preside over birth and death, the coming in and the going out of life, and the messiness of both?
Well, I think that we experienced it that way, that as we took up the necessities the duties, the work that was a necessity, as my father declined. I think it was easier for my sisters to connect it to the birth, to the things that babies require, and harder for my brothers to be in that kind of intimate space, which is also difficult space.
Uh-huh. My neighbor told me recently when they took care of her dying father, her husband became conveniently absent when it came to the real dirty work.
I think that same truth played out for us as we cared for our father.
Yeah.
The sisters were more intimately involved than the brothers were.
Right, right. Well, again, socialization.
Yeah.
We're expected to clean up the messes. Yeah.
Yes, and I think prior experience too, because all of us had babies, and so we were familiar and knew that about the type of work involved.
Right, right. So talk a little bit about the humbling experience of death.
That reference to my father being humbled it had to do with the loss of his strength. He was very proud of his physical presence. And as time passed, as his eyesight and his hearing went, it became more and more difficult for him to even navigate through the house safely.
Mm. Here in the women's room, we try to tell the many and myriad stories women have specific only to their gender. Marsha's next poem considers the obstetrical orgasm, as it is medically termed. The having of an obstetrical orgasm at the moment of giving birth is a rarely discussed story. But looking up research on the phenomenon yielded a statistic of 0.03% of women experience this orgasm. Every woman experiences labor differently, and there's evidence that a handful of people do climax while giving birth. But there is little research, as there is for many women's reproductive issues, and also the reality that this intimate experience may be embarrassing or shameful to some, and so they do not report it. The fact that a woman might be embarrassed makes me think of a sort of biblical retribution. Thou shalt bring forth your progeny in great pain. No pleasure here.
Uh-huh.
According to research, practitioners who work with these women say that the intensity of the feeling is about love related to feelings of relief, as well as a euphoria at welcoming a baby at long last. Marsha, how do you feel about this thought?
Well, this did happen, and I did keep it secret for a long time. So I was one of those people who felt embarrassed, as you mentioned. I would say what I thought about it is that it had to do with tension and release. The enormity of trying to move a child through the birth canal, and then as the baby exits, the huge release that happens.
Yeah, wow. Well, now might be a good time to read your poem, The Way It Happened.
Okay. The way it happened. How many hours did the sky bear down before it felt like a dense fist of pain loosening? As though another mouth stretched an O inside a body not my own. A body opened like a split peach, sleek and rent, the knees pressed wide. And was it joy that lurched downward, flooding the linoleum? I rise into the cries. If blood were silk and my legs crumbling pillars, if sound were a long caress of its own morphology, and screams could plow a room, could harrow light, all you would see is red. Red on the inside of closed lids, and red, the unstoppable force. Child, listen now. The evening fills with blood-colored clouds. I spend hours falling for your face. I fall for you like a ripe fruit fallen from the mouth of pleasure.
Wow. Well, that is a beautiful poem. And at that point, we're going to have to stop to take a station break. This is KPPQ LP Ventura 104.1 FM, and we're in the Women's Room, where we appreciate and support each other. I'm your host, Kathleen Good. My guest today is Marsha De La O, poet and friend of the show. Marsha has just published her fourth book of poetry titled Creature, in which, among other themes, she bears witness to women's close association with life and death. And we're back. We've just heard Marsha's poem, The Way It Happened. So I was wondering, Marsha, you use poem to express the pain and the physical and emotional and emotion of the obstetrical orgasm with the release of endorphins as an Eden, a paradise of images of fruit and pleasure in the spasm at the moment of birth. Would you share with your listener any thoughts about your poem that is about this intimate and vulnerable experience of giving birth?
Well, let me say that I was a little afraid to read it.
Okay.
That there is a sort of a fear around exposing something so personal and so completely without volition on my part.
Right.
When you have an orgasm, you don't will it and you don't make it happen. It happens.
Yeah, it happens to you.
Yes.
Yeah, because of you. Yeah. Wow. Well, I commend your fearlessness in going ahead and doing it, because I think we need women's stories. We need the truth of women's stories. I mean, men can be very caring and feminists and whatever, but they just don't know about some of this stuff because it's not been talked about.
Yes, and I did talk about it once with another woman, and I approached it very carefully, saying, "Did you notice anything, or did anything unusual happen?" And she acknowledged to me that although it wasn't an orgasm, she did have a sense of pleasure as the baby's body exited her own.
Right. So it probably is very true that there's just not been enough research, and women don't want to talk about this.
Who's asking, right?
Yeah. But, I also read when I looked up this topic, which I had not heard of before, the little research done asserts a hopefulness that pleasure at the time of birth might be used as pain relief. What do you think about that?
I think pleasure is good at any time that it occurs, and usually people have incredibly joyful moments after the baby is safely born. And if that moment also includes a physical pleasure, so be it. I'm all for it.
Yeah, right. Well, I can remember feeling like, okay, this is the best thing I've ever done.
Yeah.
It's the thing that has come out perfect. Yeah. as things really do. And now here's another side of the birth story. Since the fall of Roe, there are many horror stories of women not being able to get treatment for miscarriages, death of women who cannot get an abortion and need one, increase of rape cases in Texas. I read a whole article on that. I guess they just feel, okay, it's free game now. a child because we don't care about women. That is what the government in Texas is saying. Child victims of rape and incest being forced to carry to full term. I'm sure everybody has heard the story of a 12-year-old who had to go to another state,
Yes.
to get an abortion. I mean, that is a crime. And the list of injustices and inequality goes on and on. Would you share your thoughts about the viciousness behind demanding that a woman carry a fetus to full term and have a baby when she is physically or emotionally not in a place to do so? Because the way having a child changes absolutely everything in a woman's life. How can politicians decide this for a woman?
I think they cannot rightly decide this for a woman. Not politicians, not the Supreme Court. There is nothing more important than personal autonomy. Just as it would be terribly wrong to try and force any woman who wanted a child to have an abortion, so it is terribly wrong to force a woman or a girl who does not want to have a child to carry to full term, if that is something she cannot do. It's not that women are vessels. We build those babies with our own blood, and with our own bones. I remember when I was pregnant, I went to the dentist, and the dentist told me, "Oh, things aren't good with your teeth. It looks like the baby is leaching the calcium from your teeth." And yes, if the baby needs bone-building material or calcium, that's what they take. I built that baby with my own body.
Yeah.
And I wanted her very, very much.
Oh, yeah. Okay, and Marsha has one other poem from her book, which is going to be a wonderful conclusion. Go ahead, Marsha. Oh, it is called The Child Who Escaped.
Yes, The Child Who Escaped. And I'll just say that my child was a toddler at the time, and we used to walk to a nearby park, and there was a tree there with a low crook, and I thought, well, wouldn't she enjoy it if I just set her up here in the crook?
Oh.
The Child Who Escaped. I still visit that tree sometimes, though my daughter's in her 30s. The crook of the trunk higher these days than any foolish mother could reach. But back then, I once lifted her into the dusk and bright of leaves, dappled ere silkening one branch up. Was she more sure of herself than I thought, or was it ontological? What new-sprung world is this canopy one to grass, to grow, to go home to? I tried to change her mind, cajoled and commanded. But green's not silent. It speaks its praise of light and shadow, even in slightest breeze. And a young primate hearkens. Up she scrabbled into small rooms of luster, lit leaves, green fire, plush shadow. She climbed into velvet. She got away from me. This soul, this agile monkey creature, my only one, held in the glittering world by a green sound song.
Oh, I could just see the delight on your face. But I bet at the same time you felt some panic.
Yeah, I was worried. I was saying, do you see other mothers lifting their toddlers into trees?
But she got down safely.
Yes, she did. She came down at a time and place of her choosing.
Oh, no. How long did she stay up there?
Oh, not more than 10 minutes.
Oh, that would have been a frantic, long 10 minutes. Well,
Yes.
Thank you so much, Marsha De La O.
Thank you for having me. It's a joy to be here.
Oh, thank you. Well, yeah, thank you for coming to read and discuss your poetry from your new book, and also for your fearlessness in telling the truth about a woman's story of birth. Marsha De La O's book, Creature, is available at the library. This is KPPQ LP Ventura, 104.1 FM, and we're in the Women's Room, where we appreciate and support each other. I'm your host, Kathleen Good.